Be sure to check out our free InfoSec Day, March 3rd or March 5th. Please ask us for an invitation if you don't already have one. Everyone's invited.
My shout out today goes to Joe and Jane. You can see them here. I guess they found out that we have reserved the venue for 2020 InfoTex Jam, and they wanted to camp out for it. Somebody really needs to let them know that the jam isn't until July of 2020. I really don't think they need to be camping out this far in advance.
Dan, you do realize that Joe and Jane are cartoon characters,
What?
right?
Are you sure? I mean, just so you know, Mike, these are my guitars. Actually, that's my friend Al's guitar. But that's my, this right here is my acoustic bass. This is my 12-string. That's my Taylor. I'm really proud of that guitar.
It's a cartoon with a picture of your guitars
All
in
right.
it.
Well, okay. Well, good to know.
Coming to a theater in Lafayette, Indiana on July 24th, 2020. The InfoTex Jam. Only mark your calendars if you like having fun. Email us to register. Everybody is welcome.
Oh, hi. Dan Haddaway here, playing harmonica in beautiful Grand Canyon. Not really. Which is kind of brings us to our You Spoke, We Listened initiative here in 2020. We actually took a lot of feedback from clients and regular webinar attendees throughout the year of 2019 and boiled everything down to 7 different suggestions, 6 of which we can make work and we're putting into action right now. Starting with the fact that I wasn't in front of the Grand Canyon, I was in front of a green screen. Though we started off recording webinars and posting them as movies, we're now actually recording movies and posting them as webinars. And so the first suggestion that a few of you made was just call it a movie. All right, we're doing that. This is a movie. We aren't actually there. The second suggestion kind of relates to the first suggestion, in our opinion, is if we're going to show a movie, maybe we can have a panel discussion after the movie. The third and probably the most important suggestion that we're going to implement is to get a regular schedule and stick to it. And that came actually after our webinar that we canceled the first time, and then we actually had to cancel a second webinar, which, by the way, shouldn't happen anymore because they're pre-recorded movies, right? And then, of course, the 2 suggestions that most of you gave us was, A, make them shorter, which this one would be a lot shorter if I didn't have this You Spoke, We Listened section at the beginning of it, but we're definitely there. We are going to come out with a series of webinar shorts where we try to keep them to 20 minutes in length, and we'll identify those on our on webinars.infotex.com as shorts. And then the last suggestion is the one we couldn't implement, which is move the legal disclaimers to the end of the webinar. And that kind of helped us realize, oh, I bet, after watching the second or third webinar, that gets kind of old. But we still want to leave the legal disclaimers at the beginning of the webinar. And the reason why is because not everybody is a regular webinar attendee like you, right? Some people are here for the first time and they need to know the limits and the weaknesses with our education strategy. And so because of that, we can't move the legal disclaimers to the end. With that, I think I'll just kind of return to our regularly scheduled legal disclaimer. Thanks for joining us.
Our lawyers want you to know that when you attend any of our webinars or watch any of our movies, you're agreeing to the terms of service located at the link on the screen. We're also required to provide this abbreviation of what our terms of service include. The main point we need to get across is that regulations change on a regular basis, and we want you to know that what we present can sometimes be very time-dated information or our own interpretation of new guidance or regulations. The materials we present today are subject to change. Also, whenever we provide free boilerplates as part of our webinars or movies, we're required to point out our transfer of copyright agreement, which is also located on our website in our IT resources library. You can read it by going to the link on the screen. Please also note, by attending an InfoTex webinar or by receiving any InfoTex movie, you may be added to our mailing list. We apologize if you'd rather not receive notice of other free education. You can always opt out at the link on the screen. And one last thing before we introduce our moderator, Michael Hartke. We'll be initiating a survey directly after the webinar, and we ask you to take a minute to fill it out. We would really appreciate it. And now, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SIEM, Michael Hartke.
Thanks for the introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm very proud to introduce our webinar for February, What the CAT Seems to Be, how the typical SIEM helps smaller community-based banks comply with the FFIC Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. I would like to jump right in and announce our webinar presenter, the man with 13 letters after his name, the compliance guru from Indiana. Some say he's a dog man, but this is one cat he understands, Dan Haddaway. Dan?
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. I always love Mike's introductions. And welcome, everybody. Before we really get started, I'd like to do my monthly shout out. And this month's shout out goes to an employee here at infotex, Brian Bunnell. For a few years now, he's been our keeper of the sacred scrolls, which means that he's responsible for organizing and maintaining our boilerplate library and the checklists we use for audits and that sort of thing. But recently, he's had a new role added to his job description because unbeknownst to Brian, when he did some reviews of our movies, he came up with some really good ideas on how to improve them. Seemed to be insistent that we do the right thing to make them good movies. He actually made me totally redo January's movie. I actually had to do January's movie twice. And so we're now calling Brian our director. And we definitely appreciate his hard work. We definitely appreciate, the fact that he gets to yell cut, he gets to yell action, and probably most importantly and most meaningful to me is he's the guy that gets to make me do more work if necessary in order to improve the qualities of our webinars. So thank you very much wherever you are, Brian. One other thing I'd like to do is to go through a couple disclosures before we start today. We are a managed security service provider, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today really relates to what we do for our clients. And so it's important that you realize that there are other legitimate players in the industry. And while they should agree with most of what we're saying in general, they may take a different approach towards offering services that might get you to the same destination. And so because we only know our SIEM, would like to say that we've analyzed other SIEMs, we have, but we don't really know exactly how they work. And so what we've decided to do today is just to tell you what our SIEM does. You're going to have to translate that back to your SIEM if you're using somebody besides infotex. Also, in almost every case, the CAT statement's compliance requires you to do something. And so we're going to talk about where your managed security service provider covers a CAT statement. But know that you still usually have to do something even when your MSSP is covering a CAT statement. But what we want to talk about today is how the SIEM that infotex provides helps smaller banks comply with the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. And so the way we'll do that is by starting off talking about the CAT itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about our SIEM, but then this will be our first panel discussion webinar. And so obviously you're watching a movie right now, but after this movie, hang out because I'm going to bring in a few people that will discuss certain issues related to how the SIEM helps us comply with the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. And so, how about we go ahead and get started? Okay, so let's just kind of talk about the cat here. First of all, I'd just like to point out to you that the kitty cat there is my NOC manager, Chad Smith's cat, Margaret. Margaret became the mascot for Infotex's cat tool, which is the tool that we made available. It's a spreadsheet we made available way back in 2015 that addressed the new guidance that was voluntary. We all remember it being voluntary, right? And hopefully you recognize this iconography here. It set up 5 different domains from a maturity perspective. It helped us go through an inherent risk assessment so we can determine, how mature we really should be. Most of our clients are falling into this category here where, you're at minimal inherent risk. And so you think, hey, as long as I'm at baseline, I'm okay. But what I want to make sure you realize is that you still probably have a little work left, and eventually your examiners might be getting around to asking you why you're not at evolving. And so just know that you can start moving towards evolving, at least in the areas where you are outsourcing to a managed security service provider. But I would start laying the paper trail to answer that question now. In other words, why aren't we at evolving? There might be good reasons. If we can be ready to answer that question before the examiners ask it, we might get ourselves out of some compliance objectives that we feel don't absolutely contribute to security. Now, our cybersecurity assessment tool was published, a few months after the original guidance was released, and then we updated it when they came out with version 2 of the guidance. But what we did is we looked at maturity statement by statement instead of at a component level. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to lay a paper trail that allowed us to prioritize mitigation based on our own perceived risk. And we wanted to do that at the statement level rather than at the component level. The tool really not only did it give us the ability to then manage mitigation at the statement level, but it also gave us the ability to analyze a cybersecurity assessment tool, which really ended up resulting in this webinar, because when we analyzed the tool and when we analyzed really the maturity statements, we started realizing, holy cow, we actually contribute as a managed security service provider to the compliance of a lot of statements that smaller community-based banks, way back in 2015 at least, were not yet in compliance with. And so let's just kind of take a quick look at our cybersecurity assessment tool for those of you who didn't use it, just to kind of help you get familiar with what we're talking about here. You'll see that, we've actually numbered each of the statements. We've broken them down, but if we was to look at, columns that I have hidden here, and I can unhide those real quick for you, you'll see that they each tie back to the component. And so the main thing to know is that in order to be in compliance with the oversight component, you need to have all of these statements. In order to be at baseline, you actually need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 statements done. And so most of our clients now are at a baseline level. But between 2015 and now, over the last 5 years, they really couldn't claim baseline on the oversight component until they had all 5 of these statements in place. Makes sense? And so I'm just going to undo the hiding of the columns because I have this kind of conveniently reduced down to what we need to do today. But the way this worked is then our clients would look at each of these statements, and there's some columns in here. You can see there's a lot of columns hidden over here where they would analyze a statement, they would declare what level of maturity they were at and that sort of thing, and the rest is history, and we're way past that. But the reason we're circling back around to the tool now is because we have analyzed this tool in terms of what we cover as a managed security service provider, what we help with, what we can help with, that sort of thing, which is what the rest of this webinar is going to be about. So let's kind of return to the webinar now. Okay, well, Sophia, I love that transition here, but let's kind of talk about the SIEM now. And so what happened in 2015 and in 2016, and by 2017, everybody was getting it, they were loving it, but we ended up drawing a security monitoring architecture like this that basically, established that your managed services provider, through the use of IPS/IDS, event log management, change detection, etc., we're really helping cure a lot of these CAT statements. And if you look, what the tech team in the bank was doing before they engaged with their managed security service provider, they were not getting that many of the CAT statements, right? I mean, if you look at that, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 baseline statements that cured by what we were already doing, whereas there's a whole bunch of baseline statements that were cured by the managed security service provider. And our business just took off in 2015 as people started to realize that. Now, wait a minute here. There's something I'm supposed to remember.
Dan, don't forget, be careful what you promise. Most of this still requires cooperation from the bank's technical team.
So I just remembered something. I want to make sure you realize that there is a mutual reliance between 3 different teams whenever a SIEM is involved. In other words, the way infotex define this, the way we define a SIEM is we say a SIEM is that which facilitates the mutual reliance between 3 teams in a bank. So I hope you understand what that means. What it basically means is that if we say we can, help you with a CAT statement, doesn't necessarily mean we're doing all of the work. What we've done when we analyze the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool from a, hey, what does the MSSP do perspective, first of all, there's a whole bunch of statements that we just simply don't help with, okay? So I'll talk to you about those in a minute here. And then there's a lot of statements that we or a typical managed security service provider can help with. But most of these are in the area of audit work or boilerplates. We offer a lot of boilerplates to our managed security service provider clients and that sort of thing. So while we can help with these statements, not necessarily part of our contract, it's not necessarily part of a typical MSSP contract, but know that if you're not working with infotex, your MSSP can probably help with the same statements that we're saying we can help with. And then there's statements that we do help with. In other words, hey, if you're engaged with us, we are actually actively helping with this particular statement, even though we're not really responsible for it. We still plug into it. And I'll explain what I mean, when we get into the analysis as well. And then finally, there are those statements where if you've engaged with us for a full SIEM, meaning that we're doing IPS, IDS, we're doing event log management, we're doing change detection, and then we're running all of those different sources, those different inputs into the database that most people call the SIEM. Again, we don't really call the database our SIEM. We call the overall process the Security Information and Event Management System. There are many statements that we actually cover, and we'll talk about those as well. What we need to make sure that we remember is that we cover with the help of our clients. Let's kind of take a look at the tool from that perspective. And what you'll find is that we're able to filter down to those 3 different categories. First of all, if you look at this here, and hopefully everybody can see this, okay, but, there's statements that there's nothing here, right? In other words, designating a member of management, holding that management accountable, sorry, but we really can't help there at all. That's what the board does, right? And so we're not going to be able to help hold management accountable. when it comes to the things we can help with, if you notice, if you filter down to just the ones in this column here, you'll see that, wow, our MSSP can help with a whole bunch of stuff just in domain 1. Now, if we kind of zoom in a little bit here, the institution has board-approved policies, commensurate with risk, blah, 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 right? Well, how does InfoTex help with that? Well, if you're a managed security service provider of InfoTex's, we actually provide all of our boilerplates to you at no cost. So we can help with that. Does that make sense? And so there's a lot of, statements like that where it's just our boilerplate that makes it. But, there's still, a formal process has a comprehensive set of policies. That's boilerplate. If we get into the incident response testing though, but, you'll have to engage with us in order for us to help you, okay? And so that's what we mean by that. Let's go ahead and unfilter that column. And let's filter to the second column, which is the column we do help, just to kind of help you understand what mean there. And so here's a great example. There's only really one statement in the first domain where we do help. The reason why I say there's only one statement is because the first domain, has only got one statement showing up when we filter down to we do help. And so prioritizing organizational assets. Now that's something that you've got to do. We don't do it for you. But during our tuning period, we're actually helping you create a paper trail as to what you're not going to watch using an organizational asset prioritization method. And so most of our clients are like, wow, hey, isn't this what the CAT required? Yes, it is. We'll go ahead and use this and submit this to our auditors to fulfill that requirement. So we do help you with that. It's still mostly your work, right? You still have to tell us which assets you want to watch, which ones you don't, etc. We help you with the prioritization by doing a little mini network criticality analysis. And just so you know, your examiners, your auditors might want you to go above and beyond what we're helping you do, but we do help with that particular statement. So that's just kind of an example. Let's jump down here to, I always like going into the fourth domain, or the fifth domain, because in the fifth domain we have a lot of incident response stuff, right? So here's a good example. Scenarios are used to improve incident response detection, and a lot of people are trying to interpret, well, what does that mean? What we're basically saying is that many of our clients use this to facilitate incident response testing. We actually include it in a lot of our managed security engagements. And the main reason why is because we've learned over the years the best way to prepare your team, not only reactively, but also preventively, is to do an incident response test. We feel like that really opens management eyes and that sort of thing. And so, again, while you still do the work, we're not actually doing the test, right? But we can facilitate a test. We also have a lot of boilerplates surrounding the notion of incident response testing if you want to go ahead and facilitate your own. But our point being is that we do help with that by nature of us being engaged with our clients. Let's go ahead and unfilter that category now and bring up the final category, which is the we cover this. And this is really, the value in you working with an MSSP is that you're able to cover a whole bunch of threat management type statements, a lot of the monitoring statements, even some vendor management statements, and then definitely a lot of incident response statements, just by being engaged with your managed security service provider. And so all ports are monitored. We do that. If with our change detection system, we're scanning your ports on a periodic basis, all depending on whether you set it up daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly. And then we're providing a report to you of any ports that have changed since the last time the report was run, right? Well, guess what? We do that. We cover that for you, but don't you have to receive that report? Don't you have to understand that report? Don't you have to acknowledge that, hey, yes, we changed that port on purpose, or can you give me more information about this port? I don't remember changing it, or whatever. The point being is, even though we cover it, you still are involved in the process, because a SIEM it's the interactive mutual reliance of three different teams: the tech team, your managed security service provider, and your incident response team. So let's go ahead and return to the webinar. Thanks for bearing with me. I know I've been showing you a spreadsheet a lot today, but what I wanted to make sure you know is that if you're attending the live webinar today, well, A, start thinking of questions, because one of the advantages of that is that you'll be able to ask our panel some questions. But then B, also know that Sophia should have already delivered our CAT tool to you so you can filter things down and see what we cover versus, what we do help with and what we can help with. But if you're watching the movie, you'll need to email us, and we'll be happy to provide that CAT tool to anybody. Whether you're a client of ours or not, we'll provide that tool to you. You can use it for whatever reasons you want, including understanding how your managed security service provider helps you comply with the Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. And so with that, we are ready now to end our webinar and actually start with the panel discussion.
Be sure to check out our movie on how to test your SIEM, located on movies.infotex.com.
Okay, I hope I'm able to be heard. I'm Dan Haddaway, and this is our live panel discussion. Thanks for indulging us in our movie. We are kind of excited about the fact that this is the first time we're going to be doing this panel discussion idea. What I like about it the most is it's something that one of our regular webinar attendees suggested, and I always love it when we can deliver on a suggestion from a client. Of course, when it's live, there's a lot more ums and ahs in there, right? But what I want to make sure everybody realizes that we would really like to hear from you today. We'd really like to hear your questions. And so there is a raise your hand feature in GoToWebinar. We are, hoping that if you have any questions that you can raise your hand and we'll answer them right here live. Of course, if your question is about your specific situation, we might not raise that question in front of everybody else. If you do have a question about your own specific situation, please, reach out to us, email us, send a message to help@infotex.com. We'll be able to get back to you right away. But what I would like to make sure of, first of all, then, is that Sophia is going to be uploading the actual CAT tool that has the analysis that we performed in it. And so I'm hoping that everybody will get a chance to download that. As you can probably already tell, this is the CAT tool, and we really aren't planning on reading every single one of these to you. We figure you can read. We just want to make sure you understand how the tool is organized, and more importantly, give you the ability to ask any kind of questions that you might have already had. If you're all shy and you don't want to ask any questions, by the way, we won't say where the question's coming from unless you put that right in your question. But suffice it to say that we've already got a few questions. I've got questions for the panelists. Just to get this thing started, right? And really how we're going to do this is that we're going to let Michael and Adam introduce themselves a little bit and talk about what their role is at Infotex and why they think I drafted them for this panel and that sort of thing. And I guess, I want to make sure if you, by the way, if you aren't seeing where the download is, or if you're having trouble with the download, just raise your hand and we'll help you with the download as well there. And so I guess I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the introductions then. We have two panelists here, Michael Hartke, of course, the curator of the code, the special envoy from the SIEM, the guy that introduces me in every one of our webinars. And he's just very, very involved in the development of the SIEM. He's been with us for more than 10 years. And then we have Adam Reynolds. Adam Reynolds is our lead non-technical auditor now. He actually came through, he was a data security analyst at first, and then he became an audit processor, the guy that shuffled all the information back and forth. And he's been promoted to lead non-technical auditor just recently, and And he's kind of young though. He hasn't been with us very long. He's only been with us for more than 7 years, which I'm very proud to say by InfoTech standards isn't really that long. We've got people 15, we got people 20 years. And so we're pretty proud of our longevity here, our lack of turnover, or whatever you want to call it. So I guess I'm bragging. And so maybe that's my time to just kind of turn control of our panel over to Mike. And Mike, if you want to just introduce yourself, and we can take it from there.
Thanks, Dan. So as Dan had mentioned, I've been with InfoTex for over 10 years. I am responsible for the maintaining of the current SIEM and the development of our new SIEM, along with all of our internal tools that we use to help us watch all of your networks more effectively. Before InfoTex, I was also into computers. I've been working with computers for a very long time. I believe I started my first company at 15, and then worked in the beauty care sector at P&G. So I've been working with big data for a long time. I think that's one of those strengths that I bring to the team. I am a cat person, so this is right up my alley, and I enjoy all types of music. Hey, Adam, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Mike. Oh, my name is Adam Reynolds. As Dan mentioned, I've been working with InfoTex for a little over 7 years now. Most of that time had been spent on the MSSP side, watching alerts and the SIEM for our clients. But then in the last couple of years, I've also been working on the non-technical side of audits. As Dan mentioned, I'm currently the lead non-technical auditor. So that's looking at a lot of IT governance and policy and procedure work, but also looking at some of our audit clients' SIEMs and auditing that. So I think I'm here mainly because, I've seen our SIEM for a number of years, but I've also looked at our audit client SIEMs as well, just to make sure those are functioning properly on their end. I think that's good for me. Hand it back to you, Mike.
Well, and actually, Mike, you don't have to unmute yourself. I'll go ahead and take it from here. I think that what I'd like to do now really is just kind of get into the questions and answers part of our panel discussion here. Again, I want to encourage the audience to ask questions. If you're not exactly sure where the raise your hand feature is, maybe chat Sophia and she can help you find that. But while we're waiting there, let's just kind of come in here, and I've got 2 versions of the CAT tool up. One more of a kind of a high level in case we want to jump around or anything. But then I also have some that's a little bit easier for everybody to read. And Mike, I was going to ask my first question about asset prioritization and everything, but when I was watching the movie, I realized, oh shoot. We already answered that question in the movie, and so I never got your message back from me asking you if I could change that first question. So I might be putting you on a spot a little bit here. But what I'd like to know, one of the things that we declare as a control in our risk assessment, and our auditors, we get audited annually, of course, but the examiners, they come in and examine us once every 3 years as well, and they do take a really close look at the control we declare. Called the annual review meeting. And so what I'm wanting to know is, and actually I think I need to kind of refilter this to get to the question I'd like to get to. And I'm just going to search for it by number. One of the things I liked about our CAT tool is that we numbered everything, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to find stuff in it there. But 3136 looks like the one I'm looking for here. Yeah, and so I guess what I'm wondering, Mike, is how does that annual review meeting that we so proudly declare as a control, how does that assist with, baseline statement number 3136, which is a normal network activity baseline is established?
Yeah, so good question. So as part of our tuning and deployment process, when we first engage with a client, we establish a baseline, not only on the IDS, IPS side, but also on the event log management side. So then we have checks throughout the year, obviously, constantly looking at making sure that those levels are meeting, and those baselines, if they fall below or above, we're taking action on it. But as you mentioned, the annual review meeting is very important, because that's really an opportunity to get everybody at the table and talk about changes that may have been made to the network that weren't relayed to us in real time when they were made. And then obviously, based on those conversations, we'll decide if we need to, reset that baseline or adjust it in any way.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. I kind of, well, actually, I already knew that, right? But I thought that was kind of helpful. I'm going to go ahead now and just search for CAT statement number 3050. And so, yeah, I kind of like this statement here. So which part of the SIEM actually, helps with, changes to user access permissions?
Several parts, really. So as part of what I like to call, or I guess we as a whole like to call, our greatest hits, we recommend that you're monitoring all of your account changes and account admin activity. So, we're watching in real time demotions, promotions, deleted, created, enabled, disabled, etc. And obviously we're recommending that you are watching those. We recommend you get most of those in real time, but we also have them always on the daily. So yeah, we obviously we recommend that that you watch that activity, and that's what our system does.
Great. Oh, looks like we got a question come in, but I just want to, before I read that, I just want to say that, I hope that our audience can see how, this works. We cover this statement, if we go all the way up to the, to the first one that the movie itself answered, the only statement in domain 1, right, that we actually can help with. And that's the asset prioritization statement. And oops, there we go. And so, I can just go up to the top and go down one there. But the point being is that I just want to make sure people, understand the difference between, we help with this because during the tuning period, we've got a little method we use to help you decide what assets should be monitored. And so that's asset prioritization, right? But we don't actually cover it. We can help you with it. We can, prod you along. We can, teach you how we feel, your auditors will accept the documentation that you can develop out of it. But it also isn't, our process is focused on assets that can be monitored. There may be assets such as your VoIP systems or even, your internet banking, that sort of thing, that aren't being monitored by your MSSP. And that's why we're saying we help with it. We don't actually cover it. But let's get to that customer question there. Oh, okay. I like this question. We hear a lot about cloud security. Well, this question is for Michael. We hear a lot about cloud security. But I was wondering, how did you end up in that cloud, Michael? That wasn't a cartoon, was it?
Yeah, I'm always doing my research, so I was up there vetting those services.
Oh, another question just came in. If we are an InfoTex Elm user, where do we find documents related to your CAT maturity analysis? For example, the log analysis definitions document.
There's 2 places where you can find that. Well, it's funny. So back to the annual review meeting, that's something that we do during, well, let me back up a little bit. We do at the end of the deployment and tuning process, we basically have this document that explains exactly what we do for you, or what our system does for you and how it does it. And then we actually review that in the annual review meeting. So that can actually be found on directly on the customer's portal, their Elm dashboard, whatever you want to call it. Or obviously we always keep those records available as a managed service. Feel free to reach out anytime and we can provide you with any of that information.
Great. And you know what, I'm really proud of the log analysis definitions document because I see that our competitors are finally starting to create documents like that. But what I've always been proud of is we try to be as transparent as we can about what we do and what we don't do. And that's one of the reasons why I love that log analysis definition. So if you are an MSSP client of InfoTex's, be sure you have that before your next audit. And if you're not a client of ours, I'm pretty sure your MSSP does have a document like it. So now I'd reach out to them and say, hey, can you provide a document that helps establish what we are watching, what we're not watching? And then really it acts kind of as a decision tree, even though we do have a separate decision tree for Elm, but it really helps the auditors understand, when you're going to be notified in real time versus when you're going to be notified, via the daily report and that sort of thing. So I'm not seeing any other customer questions, so I'm going to go ahead to back to my planned questions, which Michael, I'm coming right back at you again. So my next question is what of these CAT statements? Any of these CAT statements scare you?
I don't think I'd say they scare me, but there's cause for concern for some of them, I think, or maybe just the whole program for a whole. I'll explain what I mean.
Hey,
I'm
Mike,
sorry about that.
I'm sorry, you just cut out a little bit. Would you mind backing up about 2 sentences and starting over?
Oh, sure, no problem. So I'm not scared by anything per se, but there's some things that concern me, and kind of the whole CAT tool as a whole. But I'll get to that in a minute. But I will say that the health of the system kind of concerns me. So, for example, our system's very healthy when it starts, but as we're getting sources from the clients and as things change on their network, we're not always aware of that. So, that concerns me. The health of the system, what's changed that we don't know about. I think the other thing that concerns me is that the CAT tool as a whole, it's applies to banks with 2 locations just as much as it applies to banks with 400 locations. And some of those things are really difficult for those small community-based banks to comply with. So yeah, those are the things I'd say concern me. With that being said, Adam, I'm actually curious, what is it that you see? It's kind of a black box for me. After those systems are installed, are they getting watched and all that kind of thing? So what do you see when you're auditing the SIEMs for our clients?
That's a good question, Mike. So when we audit the SIEM for our clients, we normally have a checklist of about 24 questions that we run through. I guess what we're really looking at is, who is monitoring it, what they are monitoring, and how alerts are sent and
Adam,
responded to. Yes, Dan?
Do you actually log into the SIEM nowadays when you're auditing? I'm kind of getting a little bit away from auditing now, but are you logging into the SIEM?
On occasion, we have done that, but typically I would say we don't. Again, we can, but we typically don't log in. We normally just see the, the alerts that are generated from specific things that we may be doing on site.
Okay. So you're going by a checklist then, huh?
Yes.
Would it be all right if we took a look at that checklist?
Sure. Let me pull that up real fast.
All right. While you're pulling it up, I'm going to try to switch over to making you the presenter.
Okay.
And, I'm pretty good at screwing anything up, so hopefully this will work. But hopefully, probably the screen went blank to everybody until Adam can bring it up. I'm now looking at your screen, I think, Adam. Looks like a typical audit checklist to me. The question, our notes on the answer, and ability for us to determine whether it's deficient, and then the ballpark risk for it. So talk to us about this a little bit then. Is this a control self-assessment? Do you actually, I guess you're saying sometimes you sit down to the SIEM, but not always, or how does this work?
Yes, as you can see, like question 13 and 14, we do consider asking them to do that while we are on site. Like Mike had mentioned, monitoring for user access changes. That if an admin is promoted, do they get an alert in real time? If there's a sensor that goes down, how soon are they notified? So to get back to Mike's question, I would say that, really what we are trying to answer are, is there any gaps in coverage? Are people getting the alerts? Do they understand the alerts? ends up being watched 24/7.
Now, to me, I feel like this kind of goes back to that asset prioritization. I mean, to me, there's always gaps in coverage, aren't there?
Yes.
And so really, is it more about, are you aware of the gaps? Is it more, I mean, talk just a little bit about the gaps in coverage there.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, like you said, there will be gaps, but as long as those are documented and, there's a reason that there's a gap. It's, there's no need for a control there or something like that, then that's fine. But we want to make sure that they are aware, that gaps do occur and that they should be aware of them and have that documented as well.
Okay, great. Well, I do see another customer question come in. I'm going to go ahead and take control back of the presentation as soon as I remember where to do that at. Oh, I guess I have to make myself the presenter first. That always helps. And then I'm going to go ahead and show. I hope everybody can see we're back here at the CAT tool again. But anyway, the question that came in was, how many statements do we cover? And I think I can get that answer by unfiltering stuff here. So hopefully I won't have to just add them up. If you saw the 39 down there, I think what that means is that that's how many statements. Yeah, so I think at the bottom of this, if we just go all the way down to the bottom, well, actually, maybe this is the reason why I brought this one up here. So if I'm just going to filter this down to, what we cover, and we go down to the bottom, I think it's going to be 34. Yeah, so there's 34 statements that we actually cover. There's 39 statements that we help with, which, kind of makes sense. And then there's a whole bunch we can help with. So that answers that question. Any other questions? I lost my question screen when I brought up the sharing. That doesn't look like it. So I'm going to just kind of dive back in. Let me ask you this, Adam, because, it's been about a year and a half since I've been, knee deep in audits. So how often do you look at, CAT compliance now? Are we just confirming baseline, or are we starting to talk to our audit clients about evolving if they're at that second level of maturity? And what I mean by that is I don't know if people caught it in the movie, but a lot of our smaller clients are at least, and so and by the way, the clients of ours that are at least, they're at baseline, and I sure hope their examiners don't start talking to them about being at evolving. But those of us who are at minimal, what I worry about is the examiners might point to intermediate. We want to be ready for the evolving part. And so anyway, I guess what I'm really wanting to know is, when, and not just the SIEM alone, but in auditing the CAT in general, where are you on that? I mean, where are our clients? What are we typically doing there?
Mostly we are confirming baseline. We still have some that are looking to confirm baseline, some that are at baseline and are happy at that, but then also some, I would say fewer, but still some that are looking to, go to evolving. The question is, how often do we look at the CAT? I'd say we always look at it. It's been around for about 5 years now, so that it's something that they've dealt with. Auditors and examiners, it has to have come up by now. So we always look at it to make sure the institution understands how it works and that they're working on it. But really, I guess it's how thoroughly, that we look at it depends on, the tools and processes that they have in place that they've been using to work on the CAT. But if it's a mature process, this is something that they're happy with. We'll look at a few, like a couple dozen baseline statements, just to make sure that they're answering those ones correctly. Because we do have a list of about, I think, 17 statements that we find that there's confusion about a lot of times. So if we find that they're sticking, or those 17 statements are being accurately handled, the rest of the system's normally in good shape as well.
So can I mean, because to me, a classic example of statement confusion, so to speak, is at least back in 2016 when we first started auditing, against the CAT. a lot of people would submit their network diagrams as a response to the question, can you please send us your data flow diagrams? And so we were like, oh, I think you're confused, that we're not reading the guidance to mean that a network diagram is what they're looking for, and we kind of would point out elsewhere in the CAT where, you could tell that the CAT was written for the larger banks, because it's not until you are wanting to be at an intermediate level of maturity that you have to secure your network diagram, which we know that's just because Bank of America probably has a hard time securing their network diagram, whereas most small community-based banks, it's not that hard to secure your network diagram, and I feel like you'd be foolish not to. So is that what you're talking about then with the confusion on the statements?
Yes, that would be a great example of it.
Can you give us another example?
Oh, yeah, give me 1 minute to pull that list up.
Okay. Well, while you're bringing that list up, I don't see any other questions come in. So, Mike, I think I'm going to kind of pick on you again. I felt like I picked on you quite a bit at first, so let's just keep that going, right? And so let me see here. I wanted to ask you about number 3122. I thought that was a good statement. That yeah, thresholds have been established to determine activity within the logs that warrant a management response.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. During the tuning and deployment process, you are going to, set your thresholds and make sure you're getting everything you want. Also, during the tuning and deployment process, you're going to be establishing the decision trees to establish how the client wants to be contacted for each of the different events that occurs on both on the IDS and the IPS, or IDS, IPS, and the Elm side, actually. But yeah,
Well,
so we're baselining, and then again, we're going to be looking at that during all of our checks and annual review meetings.
okay, that makes sense. Hey, what's the difference between a decision tree and the log analysis definitions?
Oh, good question. So the log analysis definitions is essentially what our system does, what our system doesn't do, really spelled out. I like to say it's ammo for the examiners and auditors. It goes down to exactly what's in your daily report, what's in your what's your real time, anything that we've asked you to change, any out of the box tuning. It really and goes into exactly how our system works, what's on every interface, all that kind of stuff.
Does it include the retention policy as well, or is that in a different document now?
No, that is also in there. How we retain, how we hash data, how we destroy data, and then it actually ends with any guidance that we help you come into compliance with. Now, the decision trees are a little bit differently. They actually spell out particular incidents. So if there was a high number of login failures from an admin account, we're going to notify you. Our default is that we're going to call you, notify you. It's going to be in your ticket. We're going to recommend that you take action on that. On the IDS side, it might be a denial of service attack or malware or something like that. It essentially just spells out for both parties exactly the actions that need to be taken and followed through with.
Okay, great. Well, hey, I see that we're running a little bit short on time now. I'm going to check to see if there's any more questions from the audience. It doesn't look like it. But Adam, I wanted to ask you one last question. And the reason why is because I also am starting to worry that maybe this seems a little self-serving, this webinar here. And so let me just ask you this question, and everybody, I planted this question with Adam. But is it possible for a bank to comply with the CAT and not have a SIEM?
I would say yes, most definitely. It does make it a bit more difficult. I mean, the SIEM, is of course a collection of technologies working together, to ingest and correlate information. So you can use different technologies to accomplish the same thing, but the purpose of a SIEM is that it's all kind of built together.
And so really a SIEM makes it easy to comply with the CAT, but you don't absolutely have to have a SIEM. You don't have to be a client of a managed security service provider in order to comply with the CAT, right?
Yes. Yeah, there can be definitely specific controls and technologies put in place without a SIEM to address statements and to reach baseline. But the approach can be much more time consuming when you have to use, multiple controls and different resources that have to work together, to meet the statements, as opposed to a single technology, which can address just many of those statements at once.
Well, and I feel like one of the main reasons why I'm aware of the answer to that question is because I am involved in auditing a rather, I mean, for us, it's a rather, what are they, like $3.5 billion bank, and they don't have a SIEM yet. Most of their IT people also don't have a lot of hair left on their head. No, just kidding you. But they've got all kinds of tools they're using and deploying, and where they've actually arrived, I think, is that they're starting to look at, there's a better business case if we was to outsource. This is what I think they're kind of heading towards. But I just want to make sure that people realize that, we feel, especially a community-based bank, is going to benefit a lot. There's a lot of value propositions that are not inherent in the CAT, by the way. The CAT's just a snapshot in time, right? It's just what the FFIEC thought we should have in place to cyber, everything. But I just feel like we want to make sure before we leave the webinar that the audience realizes that, we would, if you're not a managed security service provider of ours, of course, we would love to work with you, but you can, comply with the CAT and not have a SIEM. With about 2 minutes left, I feel like we need to kind of return to the more formal part of our webinar, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything here. And so, Mike, did we do a drawing this time? We always do a drawing at the end of our webinars. I tell you what we're going to do is that we got 5 questions from 3 different people. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw from those 3 people. And so one of you is going to win a SOC 2 review, just so you know. If we'll that's what we give away with our drawings, is you give us one of your SOC 2s and we'll review it for you using our SOC 2 review methodology. And then I think finally, and by the way, we'll use random.org to help with that drawing, and someone will be reaching out to whoever wins that drawing. But before we go into the thank you, thank you everybody for attending, and especially for those who asked the question. But even if you didn't ask a question, we really appreciate your regular attendance of our webinars. But before we go on, I really hope that you can give us some feedback. I believe there will actually be an evaluation form that goes out to you in email at the end of the webinar. But if you don't feel like, filling out a form, you don't like filling out forms, that's okay. Just email us what you think of the panel discussion approach. Let us know what you think of the movie. More importantly, actually, most importantly, what would you like us to talk about? What would you like our webinars to be about? I'm sure if you go to webinars.infotex.com, that's our webinars for the year, and we will not change them this year. We will be there. Well, actually, the movie will be there, right? Unless it's a panel discussion. But we also have some shorts, by the way. We have 3 20-minute webinars coming up, which we're really kind of excited about. They really turned out to be pretty good. We're still working on the movies, of course, but anyway, any kind of feedback that you can give to us about our education process, we would really like to hear from you, because we feel like that's one of the most important add-ons to our service, right? One of the values we bring to the equation is not just that we're helping you with technology risk monitoring, but we're also helping you with risk response by and through our education process. And so with that, if there aren't any more questions, but I feel like we can end our webinar. Thank you everybody for attending. Mike and Adam, thank you very much. Adam, I really appreciate your being willing to sit in on these webinars. Mike's already kind of as part of his job now. I definitely appreciate that as part of your job, Mike. But Adam, good job. Mike, good job. And thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.